Hey all, welcome to Parker's Reefs. Today's episode I'm going to give you a tour of the engine room on the Dream reef tank. Alright, thank you for joining me on another episode of Parker's Reefs, and this is one I've had a huge number of requests for. Whilst I've already done a video on my incredible custom-made Hmahli sump for the Dream reef tank, and it's had a huge number of views, I continually get asked for an update on it and to go over how the sump is operational now and any little bits of infrastructure I've added to the system since. So I figure, let's rip the doors off this cabinet, we'll bring the camera in nice and close, we'll go over each and every piece in the Dream reef tank engine room. All right, now that we've got some access, let's bring that camera in and go over each piece one by one. All right, so you can see the sump, the filter roller, the skimmer, the Refugium, the media housing, the return pumps, temperature probes, the KH Guardian, the pH monitors, of course the filter roller. We've got calcium reactor, Kalkwasser reactor, we've got GFO, dosing lines, CO2 scrubbers. There's lots to go over. I reckon we might be best off starting over here on the right. We'll work our way across to the left, so let's do it. All right, starting over on the right-hand side of my cabinet, you'll notice I've got my DRP dry foods here. As touched on before, I don't often feed a lot of pellets, but when I do, these are the ones I go for, and the 2 and 3 seem to be the perfect size for my fish. So I keep them there just for handy access, because typically the only time I'm feeding pellet food is when I don't want to get my hands dirty from frozen food, so I like to keep them there nice and accessible. The next probably biggest and most obvious item you're going to see here is the Reef Octopus Kalkwasser reactor. That has just switched off from turning the slurry down the bottom into the fresh RO solution on the top here. Now, that is constantly fed by the Kamoa X1 Pro T up here. That pulls fresh RODI out of my water reservoir and puts that into the reactor here. Currently running that at 1.5 milliliters a minute, which just gives me a nice steady drip, and I'll show you where that goes into the sump a little bit later, but it runs away there. The actual motor that turns the solution around is set to switch on for 10 minutes at a time, 4 times a day, and that seems to be enough to keep it nice and clear. You can see, despite the fact that I filled that up on the weekend, and I am still only putting a little bit of Kalkwasser in there because I'm waiting to see what others find about this actual slurry dosing. I'm still keen on just dosing the liquid itself, so I'm keeping the solution probably undersaturated, to be honest, and it's working just fine for me. All right, the next item you can probably see hidden over here behind the Kalkwasser reactor is the Sea Torch media reactor. I currently just run GFO in there. I'm using the Aquaforest Phosphate Minus. You can see how much I've got in there, and I've got that just gently tumbling away. It's fed off my manifold up here, which is coming from my accessories Biz A200. That then feeds back along into my sump in a spot where I can see how much water's coming out, and just as a bit of a visual reminder that it's running, because I like to be able to see when the accessory pump's running, because that is also plumbed into my UV and chiller that are outside. So I always like to ensure that that has got power and that it is flowing water through, just to make sure I don't cook the UV system out there at all. But as you can tell, it's working a treat. It's accessible from this side door here, but from the front where you access the sump 99% of the time, it's barely visible, which is exactly the way I like it. All right, next up is this big Sea Torch calcium reactor here. This is their big unit. You can see it's got all the media filled in it here. It's currently running off a Kamoa X1 Pro T2, which is basically exactly the same as the Pro T1, but it's got a display and a dial for local control. It works an absolute treat. It's currently running at 5 milliliters a minute. The pH on this one has been brought down fairly low. We're down to about 6.4 pH, and you see I'm actually starting to melt some media now. After that iodine spike I had, now that we've got things back on track, I'm really starting to see some consumption again. So it's churning through some media again, and basically once its media gets down to probably about that mark there, I'll open it up and top it up, because little do people know that if you get your media too low in the reactor, you actually end up wasting a lot of gas. Because the less media in your reactor, the more water in your reactor, and the more water in your reactor, the more the more CO2 it takes to bring that pH down. So ensuring your reactor is nice and full of media means that it takes less gas in that water to bring the pH down. It's going to give you a better result. Plus, you've just got more media in there just slowly dissolving. So keep your calcium reactors full. I do have the bubble counter, barely visible there. I can just pop over and see that. I have my calcium reactor bottle on the other side of the this wall. It's actually in my laundry under the basin in there. It has a carbon dosor regulator on it, which I can adjust, but to be honest, it ticks away all good. I have a basic WayPro pH controller in this unit, and I have it somewhat permanent mounted just so I can see that things are at 6.4 pH. I don't anticipate changing that pH at all. I will control my calcium reactor just purely from the speed of the Hmahli pump, but you never know. If things get a little bit dire, I can definitely turn that pH down a little bit further, but for the most part, that pH controller pretty much just regulates the carbon dosor, and it also lets me know if that bottle is empty and I need to switch it. All right, the next piece of equipment in here is my Pacsun Co2 Scrubber. You can see I'm currently running the Aquamarine Aquaristic media in there, which actually starts life as pink and turns white when it's exhausted. So this pulls air in from the bottom, comes up through this line, which then goes and feeds into my skimmer. You can see I've got probably about 40% of the media has been expired so far, so I'd say it's probably got about another 3 weeks in it before, or maybe 4 weeks before I've got to take that media out and change it over. But at least the Aquamarine Aquaristic media is somewhat affordable, because sometimes I find this CO2 media is pretty expensive. I am exploring options, and when I say exploring options, I'm just looking to find the motivation to feed this line out through the wall into the cabinet where my chiller and UV is, so that I can have it pulling fresh air in. I'll still have this unit there. I'm just expecting that it will last a lot longer, because let's be honest, there should be a lot less CO2 and fresh outside air than there is closed up in the house like we are here. Oh, one more thing on my calcium reactor. I should point out that it does actually have an expansion chamber tucked away in the corner over there. That was just to ensure that I was getting the absolute maximum CO2 pulled out of the water before it goes back into my system. And it also allows me to put a bit more media in the system over there. So it's tucked neatly away in the corner there, and it is a matching sea torch expansion chamber. All right, the next biggest obvious thing in this side of the system here is, of course, my Hmahli X4 Pro doser and these 4 sea torch dosing containers. You can see I've labeled each one of them. I do have some alkalinity in there, even though I run Kalkwasser and a calcium reactor. If I just want to fine tune settings, I do that with the doser. It just allows me to get the calcium and alkalinity exactly balanced where I want them to be. To be honest, I don't need to use it all that often, but it is handy to have it there on tap, because, you know, this is my dream reef tank. Other than that, I've got some potassium, strontium, and some magnesium there. They're not elements I have to dose a lot of, to be honest. Potassium does get a little bit, but to be honest, with the iodine spike I had, I pulled all of these things back and went right back to basics. But now that the system is a little bit more in the clear, particularly the potassium, I'll start feeding a little bit more in and just make sure that I'll do plenty of ICPs to make sure we're right on the spot we want to be, and to make sure that nothing's getting out of hand. But these are almost redundant, but I do like to have them there just so I can feed some solutions into the system whenever needed. All right, I think that covers the empty end of my cabinet. Let's head on over into the middle section, where I can show you how the sump operates and the equipment in there. All right, the middle chamber of my sump is basically where the water starts to enter in and make its way through. So I'm not sure how well you can see, but I have my 3 drain lines at the back there. I've got a fully submerged, a partially submerged, and an emergency. They feed in through the back. They then come down this side chamber here, this narrow little chamber here that is where the water all settles and balances in. It then feeds in through the bottom, well, through the side here, into my Hmahli filter roller, where I'm trying out their brand new filter floss. Seems to be working quite well. I did just fit it up yesterday, so I can't give you my long-term thoughts on it, but it is definitely a lot more porous than the previous roll, and I'm expecting it to last considerably longer. Once the water's passed from the filter roller chamber, it comes through. You can see maybe down here, the little openings down here, into my skimmer chamber. Now this chamber here, we've got a little stand just to raise the Cove I250 skimmer up, and it then obviously has its air intake feeding off to that CO2 scrubber. The skimmer itself is running absolutely flawlessly. It has a vast neck cleaner on there, ensuring the neck stays nice and clean all the time. And it also has a drain on it that is continually plumbed in there, so that I don't have to empty the drain cup. Now, there are a couple of little tricks to that, because that's incredibly dangerous. You don't want your skimmer to overflow, empty out your tank, and have your ATO continually top it off. So I deliberately have this drain set to be a very slow drain, and I do still have a float switch in my skimmer cup, so that if the skimmer does fill up quickly, it's actually going to turn my skimmer off and hopefully give me time to notice before my salinity drops through the floor. I do use the original little silencer holder as a Nice little pipette holder, which is where I also keep my Milwaukee salinity checker. Because I am doing continuous auto water changes on this system, I like to check the salinity daily. I don't trust probes for that. I always like to check that with my Milwaukee just to make sure that nothing's going wrong. About the only other thing in this middle section here is behind the skimmer there is a built-in RODI chamber. It's deliberately in probably the most awkward spot on this sump, and that's because it's completely automated. I never have to access that. It's got a little electronic device that I built myself in there with 2 float switches, one at the bottom and one at the top. It will turn on my RODI system when it gets to the bottom float switch and turn it off when it gets to the top. So I continually have RODI in there. My filter itself is actually outside, but it's completely, like I said, completely automated, so I don't have to worry about getting access to that at all. It just keeps things topped up. So I think we can probably move on to the next chamber. All right, onto the next chamber of my sump. And one thing I did forget to point out, I have my Kalkwasser Drip feed coming out here, just so I can keep a visual eye to make sure that the Kalkwasser is A, dripping, and B, not dripping too fast. On the other side here, I have my calcium reactor dripping, so I can make sure that it is dripping and it's not dripping too fast. It's one of those little things that I like to put front and center so I can have a quick visual check and make sure everything's working as it should be. We then have my Refugium here, which I don't have the light on at the moment. I'll turn it on for a second so you can see the light in action. It runs the Kessel A360X Refugium light on there. It has absolutely heaps of power and is pumping this macroalgae out. Does a great job of keeping the nutrients in check. I do also have my Aquaforest Life biofill stones down the bottom there, which I do change out about every 8 months. I think they recommend every 3 to 4 months, but I go 8 months and then I pull them out and put some fresh ones in just to make sure that I keep all that live bacterial strains happening nice and cleanly in there. From there, we've got this little chamber here, which is currently not used at all. I did potentially look at putting my heaters in there, but it just had to be in there to make sure that the water flowed through the system the way I wanted it to. Then we move over into this end chamber there, which holds all of my bacteria media. So I have all my ceramic balls in there, the GAE ceramic balls in there, which just allows the water to flow through them and make sure that the bacteria has got no shortage of space to colonize. I also have my Shago 600 watt titanium heaters in there, and they are powered by the Aqualogic controller up there. From there, we come across into my return chamber in this back section here under the KH Guardian, where I have 2 Abyss A200s in there. The first one is the accessories pump, and the inlet of that is right at the front of that chamber. So it actually pulls in and goes out to my chiller, my UV, and to the GFO reactor. The return one itself actually points that way. So it pulls water in from the back of the chamber and back up, and the UV and chiller points down right at the inlet of that pump. Now that's my best efforts of ensuring that the water doesn't just circulate through the UV, that it gets pulled in, goes through the UV, and then comes behind the pump. I know it's in the same chamber, but it does actually work fairly well. From there, I have my KH Guardian, which is doing alkalinity tests for me every 2 hours and is keeping on top of things, particularly during this period where I turned a lot of things off while I was sorting out that iodine. My alkalinity is now starting to get consumed in serious numbers, so I'm very gently, slowly bringing that alkalinity back up by turning up my calcium reactor and Kalkwasser, but all in all, it is tracking along quite well. I do have the matching sea-torch containers for its own alkalinity reserve and its reagent reserve, just to keep things neat and tidy. One other piece of this equipment in this end of the system that is not tidy enough just yet, but it does work, is the automatic water change system, which is being powered at the moment by the 2 Versa pumps back here. They're continually moving 20 litres of water a day, so one just brings water in and one brings water out. As easy as that. That just keeps on top of my water changes for me. But should I want to do a bigger change than that, I have a drain line there and a fill line there, which allows me to empty the tank out, just like I showed you in the video when I was approaching that iodine problem. I bring the return outlets down, turn off the return pump, and open up that drain tap. I let the accessories pump completely empty the sump, and it continually drains the sump as the display tank comes down. Once I've got to the desired water level, I close that drain tap, open up the fill tap, press a button on my phone which turns on the pump in my IBC and puts brand new salt water into the system. It allows me to do about a 500 or 600 litre change in about 10 minutes, which is super handy. All right, the next part of the engine room is out here with my dog's kennel. We actually custom built this box to incorporate the dog's kennel as well as a place to put the chiller, my UV and RODI in it. So let me pop open the hood and I'll show you how it all operates. You can possibly hear the chiller running right now. the way it works, the water comes from my sump through the accessories pump, through the wall and in through here. I have that all insulated. It then goes into my big Pentair 80 watt UV, which feeds through here, then comes out of my UV into the Teco TK2000 chiller, which you can hear running now. Now, I have deliberately made sure that the inlet for the chiller, the air inlet, is this end, because over here I have a mesh end where the fresh air can be drawn in, and then we have the opening at the front here for the hot air to be pushed out. That keeps all the noise and heat from the chiller outside. When it's running, we don't even know inside, and even when we're sitting outside here, you barely notice it's on, but it is good to have that out of the house. The Pentair 80 watt UV, whilst it is a tight fit in there, I have done a service on it once and it wasn't the most fun job ever, but it's something you do once a year, and it took me probably about an hour and a half, so I think I can deal with that without having to find somewhere inside the house to put that UV. So if it takes me a little bit of effort out here once a year, I'm happy to deal with that. My Reef Pure RODI unit here, like I said, is plumbed up automatically for that reservoir inside. Only turns on when the reservoir is empty and turns off when that reservoir is full. It's fed from water in from my laundry, goes in there, and the drain pumps straight out into the storm water, which makes life nice and easy. I do have the Auto Aqua dual TDS unit on there just so that I can check the TDS post membrane and then post DI resin, just so I can keep an eye on things to make sure that nothing needs replacing. But all in all, this neat little system out here works a treat. Once you close that lid up, it just looks like another piece of furniture out here that the kids can sit on when we're having a barbecue dinner. Let's jump in the laundry now and I'll show you the final piece of the puzzle. All right, now this is the wall behind the tank, and there's our laundry basin, and I've managed to take a little bit of the space out of here as well. You can see my CO2 bottle and carbon doser regulator over there just ticking away. That ensures I get the space away from the tank with that CO2 bottle, and it means when I need to swap that out, I get nice, easy access to it. I've also got my drain lines here, which is where that drain from the sump comes in, so it pumps the water out through there and then straight down into the drain to ensure I don't have to worry about bucketing water or anything away from the tank. It just allows me to turn a couple taps and we're off and running. So that's all the space I'm allowed in here. I think I've probably pushed the friendship far enough as it is, and I'm glad to say it saves some precious real estate underneath the tank. All right, guys, there you have it. That's the overview of the Dream Reef tank sump and all the engine room equipment. I hope that's been worthwhile. If you've got any questions, comments, feedback, anything at all, pop it in the comment section down below. I do personally reply to each and every one there. If there's anything in particular you want to know further information on, or if you want me to do a further video on any one of those bits of equipment, just let me know. I'm more than happy to. Other than that, guys, till next time, stay safe, keep reefing. Bye.